Living, where we air every Wednesday at 6 p.m. in Vancouver, 100.5 FM, Co-op Radio, CFRO. And today I'm really excited about our guest. We're going to have an interesting conversation. But before I tell you what we're going to talk about, I want to introduce our guest today. Is Dr. Bob Dickson, the founder of Safe Water Canada and he's the founder of Safe Water Calgary and the chair of Fluoride Free Canada. And today we're going to discuss all things about water and the importance of good, clean water in our lives. And he's on a mission in regards to really eliminating fluoride from our water. Now, the mission of Fluoride Free Canada is really to educate the public and decision makers on the urgent need to eliminate artificial water fluoridation across Canada on an ethical and safety grounds. Their vision is for Canada to be a country in which scientific integrity and sound medical ethics underpin every public health policy, and one in which we can have confidence in our public pronouncements from all health officials, especially community-based medical officers of health. That has not been the case with water fluoridation. Welcome to the program, Dr. Bob. Pleasure to see you.
Nice to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, it's something that when our good friend Michael, who I consider my partner in production when we do these broadcasts now, when he told me about your work, and it's because years ago when I was learning about good health and clean food and specifically clean water, fluoride came up a lot. And, you know, I do my best to avoid fluoride in my water the best that I can. And you've told me that here in Vancouver, we're lucky that we don't have fluoride in our water. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you down this path for being an advocate for this powerful message.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Sure, I'd be glad to chat with anything you want to go through here about fluoridation. I've been studying this for 26 years now, so I'm pretty well versed in it. So Calgary has a long history of actually not being fluoridated for the most part. Some cities like Toronto have been fluoridated since 1960s. Edmonton, Red Deer was the first city in Alberta, 1959, to become fluoridated. Lethbridge has been fluoridated since the 1960s, but 98.2, I think it is now, 98.2% of British Columbia is not fluoridated. About 38% of Alberta, and that runs across Canada. About that 38 to 40% of Canada is fluoridated. So yeah, Calgary's had this varied history. We had 4 plebiscites in the 60s, 1960s and 70s, and they all defeated fluoridation narrowly. And then in 1989, they had a 5th plebiscite, and that one narrowly passed water fluoridation with a big push from Alberta Health and Health Canada and even the CDC in the States. And so in 1998, some activists in Calgary had really pushed the city to have a plebiscite. And by the way, plebiscites are not a good thing. It's for healthcare. They're not a good thing for medicine. You shouldn't be voting on whether to medicate your neighbor or your friends or anybody else, and they shouldn't be voting to medicate you, and that's what a plebiscite does. But anyway, we had a plebiscite in 1998. I was a busy family doctor, lots of things crossing my desk every day and week, and so it sounded good. The information from Alberta Health Services and from the Alberta Dental Association all sounded good, so I voted for water fluoridation without looking at the science. Activists came to me after and said, well, why did you do that? And I said, well, I don't have the time to look at it all. And they said, well, you really should in this case because there's a lot of information against water fluoridation, a lot of science. So I did look at it and I went, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've made a mistake here. I've voted for something that we really shouldn't be doing. And so I took it to my good friend, Dr. James Beck, who was one of my mentors at the University of Calgary Medical School in the 1980s. And James is a combination doctor and PhD. And he had just retired, and I said, Jim, do you have time to look at this? And he says, yeah, I've got lots of time. And I said, what do you think of water fluoridation? And he said, well, I'm from the States originally. I was trained in Texas and in Berkeley, and I don't know much about it. I think it's good. And so James looked at the science too, and a few weeks later when I talked to him, he just said exactly the same thing. Oh my gosh, what have we done? And so I said, Jim, will you partner with me and try to get this out of Calgary's water? And he says, sure, Bob, no problem. We should have this done in a few months. Those were the exact words. We should have this finished with all the science we have on our side within a few months. And flash forward about 12 years, in 2011, we finally got the taps turned off in Calgary. After numerous meetings with city councilors, with deans of medical schools, with medical officers of health, dental officers of health, with Health Canada, etc., that mostly went nowhere except for those meetings with the councilors. They grew and grew, and they actually listened to the science. And so in 2010, they made the motion. They passed the motion 10-3 in City Council to end fluoridation, and the taps were turned off in 2011. And they're still off now, despite us losing the plebiscite, the next plebiscite in 2021, along with the civic election. So we lost that plebiscite resoundingly because of, again, support for the pro-fluoridation aside from Alberta Health Services, College of Physicians and Surgeons, Dental College, et cetera, et cetera. And so council voted 12-3 at that time to restart fluoridation, and it's taken them 4 years. We're probably going to have it back in after them spending $28 million of our taxpayers' money to rebuild the fluoridation system because it's so toxic and so volatile. They should be restarting fluoridation in the end of March, so in just over a month from now.
Wow. It's amazing, really how long it takes to create this change on such a level. And I guess one of the questions where I want to start is really, to give people an understanding who really don't know, because when I went down my path probably almost 30 years ago of learning, more about what we're putting into our body and good health and clean water, fluoride came up to me, and it was introduced in a way that it was a known neurotoxin, and it calcifies the pineal gland. And that was all I really needed to hear. And there's a few facts. I'm not a scientist by any stretch. So I kind of look for common sense, or what makes sense to me anyways. So what is fluoride, and why do they think that it would be good in our water? Why do they think it's good for our teeth? What is this chemical, or whatever it is, fluoride?
Mark, you were way ahead of your time back then. Not many people realized that it was a neurotoxin. And it was, at that time, it was proven, and it is proven even more now with all the new science that's out. So what is fluoride? Well, it's number 13 on the periodic table, and it's in the bromides. The bromide family, and it's highly volatile. It's a tiny aggressive ion that cannot be removed with virtually anything except for reverse osmosis or distillation. We can get into that a little bit later. I'll give you a good website that has done a lot of research on the ways to remove fluoride. But what we put into our water is not natural calcium fluoride, which is in almost all the groundwater around the world at varying levels. Like, for instance, in the Bow River in Calgary, we have usually about 0.2 parts per million of natural calcium fluoride. And in the Elbow system, which feeds the south part of Calgary, it's about 0.3 parts per million. That'll vary between 0.1 to 0.4 parts per million. But that's calcium fluoride, which is pretty tightly bound. And our body can handle that reasonably well. We sequester about 50% of it in our bones, where it makes the bones thicker but more brittle and easier to break. Part of it gets across the blood-brain barrier. Some of it will cross the placental barrier, and that's when we really get into problems. So what we have is pregnant women drinking fluoridated water. In good Canadian studies, and 10 studies that are in the MIREC cohort out of Health Canada, and MIREC stands for Maternal Infant Research on Environmental Contaminants. So there's researchers in York University in Toronto and Simon Fraser University in your town in BC, and they've followed these MIREC cohorts and the young kids right from time of birth on up. And they've shown with really good studies, some that are published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top journals in the world, that indeed water fluoridation promotes neurotoxicity or brain damage in our kids. And that's anywhere from a couple of points up to high as 10 or 15 points if you can't breastfeed your new baby and the mother feeds baby with fluoridated water, mixing the formula. So highly neurotoxic, and also up to a tripling of ADHD. So this little hydrofluorosilicic ion that comes into city water is scrubbed out of the fertilizer industry, mostly the fertilizer industry stacks in the United States, in Florida, and in China. And a little bit from Mexico, a little bit from Trail, BC, a little bit from southern Saskatchewan from the potash industry, but it's a toxic waste that is not allowed by strict law into the air, into the ground, into any of the waters, rivers, lakes, streams, whatever. It's not allowed. And so these industries have to find a way to dispose of their toxic ion. And they've managed to convince doctors and dentists over the last 70 or 75 years that fluoride is good for poor kids. It's good for their teeth. And they've used the percentage of 25% reduction in cavities over the last few years, couple of 3 decades. That's really not based on good science at all. Even the esteemed Cochrane collaboration has shown and proven that. That's the worldwide body that evaluates medical science. And they've said that no, fluoridation really has no effect. And they came out with a second report just in October of this last year saying exactly the same thing, between 0 to 4% effectiveness. So in other words, less than 1/4 of one cavity a lifetime decrease with water fluoridation. Another big study out of the UK earlier this year that was finally published, the Lotus study, that was with, well, there's about 17 million people in total over 10 years, and that showed between a 0 and 3% decrease in caries or cavities. And so again, that's nothing. That's negligible. You're going to toxify people's brains. You're going to harm women's thyroids. You're going to harm kidneys. You're going to damage bones. You're going to disturb the gut microbiome to decrease 1/4 of one cavity in a lifetime. You got to shake your head. I think you mentioned common sense there, didn't you, Mark?
Yeah, well, it's certainly what I mentioned because it makes no sense, especially when you talk about it being you know, a way of getting rid of something they can't get rid of, and it really makes no sense to me when you say you can't put it in the air, they can't put it in the waterways, can't do anything with it, yet they can put it in our drinking water. And so to me, right
And let us
there,
dispose of it in our bodies.
pardon me?
And let us dispose of it in our bodies.
Yeah, right? Like it makes no sense, especially when it's a known neurotoxin. So it reminds me of, an interview I did last year with a woman, and their documentary was called Plastic People. And it was the same thing, how plastic comes out of a byproduct of the petroleum industry, and then how that pollutes our environment in a way that's destroying the planet. And in the same way, I think, fluoride, it's like, when did we become, the disposal of these things? Now, that being said, you
Exactly.
referred specifically to the damage it does in kids and children. What about adults? What about us? You still go to the dentist today and they still want to soak your teeth in fluoride. What does it have any effect at a certain age? Does it change? What's the difference does age make for people?
Yeah, well, the pro-fluoridation is keep pounding away, safe and effective, safe and effective. And if you repeat a mantra long enough, some people will actually believe that. It's not safe and it's not effective. And they say it's even safe for adults and seniors, and it's good for adults and seniors. And there's absolutely zero studies or proof on that. What it does is makes teeth stronger, harder, but more brittle. Like if you have a steel bar, you don't want it to be absolutely stiff and solid because then if some stress goes on it, it'll break. If that steel has a little bit of flexibility in it, then it'll bend, it'll kind of like waver with forces and it won't break. Same with teeth. So if you look at the states in the US, like Kentucky, Louisiana, Georgia, they're like 98, 99% fluoridated. And they have the highest edentulous rate of any states in the US. Edentulous meaning loss of teeth in later years. So the highest fluoridated states have the highest loss of teeth. Guess which state has the lowest loss of teeth? That would be Hawaii, which has, ironically, the lowest fluoridation rate as well. So again, that's just another thing that should end it. So
Well,
it's not good for adults.
this is the thing that always profounds or blows my mind. Everybody says trust the science, yet
Uh-huh.
when the science doesn't agree and the facts don't match up, it strikes me that the science isn't there on that sense, or the debate between it's good and it's bad. But we're not looking at these other studies. And we're seeing that in different parts of society these days with some more of the transparencies coming out in terms of so many different things that are polluting the environment, which then pollutes our human beingness as we ingest it all, and it blows my mind that the education has been, literally suppressed. And how do we move forward? What do we do differently? And what do we do about our water? Because it's interesting, you say upwards of 90, what was it, 98% or something of British Columbia that already doesn't have fluoride in their water. And then across Canada was about 38.5%. Is that because
Yeah, somewhere in there.
is that because these municipalities are actually voting to have fluoride in, or is it just because the elected officials feel it's the right thing?
Well, it's not a national program. It's not a national product at all. It's not provincial. It's up to the municipalities to decide what programs they want in as far as what goes into their water. So that creates sort of a bit of an end around, but Health Canada still recommends it. So then the cities and towns will often say, well, Health Canada recommends it, so it must be safe and effective. Alberta Health and BC Health probably recommends it too, but Alberta Health does for sure. And so therefore it has to be safe and effective. And so it's left up to the municipalities, and really councillors are, like you said earlier, you're not a scientist, councillors are not scientists neither. And so they're bombarded with all this information and data from both sides. We have a lot more science than the pro-fluoridationists, but they're bombarded with a lot. And this isn't the only issue they have on their plate, obviously. Counselors are extremely busy. And so they usually don't look at the science. But in 2010, what they did is they said, we're not scientists, but let's look at the morality and the ethics of mass medicating our entire population for a disease with a medication that's proven a medication in federal courts in both Canada and the United States. And by the way, fluoride is not needed for one single body function, not needed for anything. If it all disappeared from our planet, we'd be healthier, but it's not needed for anything in our bodies. So don't let anybody tell you it's a mineral or it's a nutrient or it's a vitamin or anything like that. It's hydrofluorosilicic acid is it's a chemical waste product out of the industry stacks. So what can we do about this? Well, Quebec has been incredible. They're at 99.6% not fluoridated now. And by the end of the year, Dr. Gilles Perrant, a naturopath who has led OSECUR and over 300 smaller organizations, he guarantees me that they'll be 100% not fluoridated in Quebec by the end of this year. And Ontario is the most fluoridated province in Canada. It's over 70, maybe 71% now fluoridated in Ontario. And their teeth are definitely not any healthier than yours in BC or those in Quebec. So what we did in Calgary when we went through this last petition in 2021 is we sent this flyer, a two-sided flyer, very good science and information on it, to over 410,000 Calgary homes. 410,000. And we still lost the plebiscite. And if you look at, I'll just show you the way the pro-fluoridationists roll here. This fellow here is Dr. Craig Young, and he has an excellent little blurb there on fluoridation that I should probably read to you, actually. It's very short and it's very prescient. He says, as a dentist, and he studies the science more than anybody that I know, doctor or dentist. He says, as a dentist, I oppose fluoridation along with many of my colleagues here in Calgary. There is a consensus that fluoride's preventative actions against cavities are primarily topical, not when swallowed. Studies show that at best, fluoridation results in less than one cavity per child. This was 5 years ago. Now it's showing way less than that. World Health Organization data shows that fluoridated and non-fluoridated nations have virtually the same cavity rates. You cannot outprescribe diet and lifestyle. I love that last sentence. You cannot outprescribe diet and lifestyle. Craig is so good. And he doesn't allow fluoride across his doorstep, except for a little bit of silver diamine fluoride, which you can just treat a small cavity with. But other than that, no fluoride in his office or in his system.
That's absolutely brilliant. I appreciate the work that is definitely being done there. And I'm actually getting these slides. I found them on your website. I'm going to get them to Michael and maybe he can put them up a little bit bigger for our online viewing audience. But I know that they can also find it on your website at safewatercalgary.com. There's a lot of great information there in regards to what Dr. Bob has just been saying right now. And I think it's definitely worth taking a look and checking it out, because information, I think, is the most important thing. And when we're not being told the truth or getting the best information necessarily, I think it's important for people to do their own research and get their own information so that they can actually understand and make their own informed decision. And that's paramount to me in the world today, where we're getting duped by propaganda in regards to what's happening. And it's not just fluoride in our water, it's all the chemicals that are in our food supply, in everything that we do. Our the soaps, the deodorants, the shampoos, the makeup for people. There are some incredibly toxic chemicals in these things, and it's so important to kind of do your research and be aware. Now, what should we do? What should people do about drinking water? Because I avoid tap water regardless. I'm just not a tap water guy. So what would you say to someone like me, or someone who's starting to think more about, well, where do I get my water? Is even if I live in Vancouver, BC, or these unfluoridated, fluoridated communities, what's the best thing? What's the best water to drink? What should we do? Because there's so much, you got Kangen water and alkalized water and all that information about water. How do people make the best decision? What do they need to know?
Very, very good question. Very broad question. Yeah, I've come over the years to think that I used to think that Calgary's water was pristine mountain water. Well, there's a lot of fertilizer products. There's a lot of pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, hormones, and other things that get through our systems and come into our public waters. So that's whether you're fluoridated or not. So I don't think really that anybody should be drinking tap water when they don't have to. Now, it can be pretty cheap to filter out a lot of those things, except for fluoride. It's very difficult to filter out. So in Vancouver, BC, and Quebec, and those places, even just a Brita is fine to take most of the things out, a Brita fridge filter. Or you can get an on-the-counter filter like a Santevia or like a Berkey. And those filters too, Santevias and Berkeys on top the counter, do have an additional fluoride filter you can buy. But the problem is they don't work for very long. After a few weeks or a handful of months, you have to replace that fluoride filter. So the only real way to remove fluoride, and the best way to remove all the toxins from all your house water, because if you just use a fridge filter, that means you might still be cooking with contaminated water. You would probably be bathing and showering in it. You'll be watering your plants with it. You'll be feeding your pets with it. So a whole house reverse osmosis system is probably the best. You can get them under the sink, but you have to be careful to get one that's pressurized, because if they're not pressurized, if they're just feeding from the top, they can develop bacteria in the bottom of the tanks. So a whole house reverse osmosis system can cost you anywhere between the high hundreds of dollars into the tens of thousands of dollars. I've seen some real good systems that also hydrogenate the water and do other good things for it at around the $4,000 or $5,000 mark. But not everybody can afford that, and not everybody should have to afford that. So get a good Brita filter or a countertop filter. If you're in a non-fluoridated area, get the fluoride filters or reverse osmosis system if you're in a fluoridated area. I'm going to have to do that myself when I get back from Mexico. I don't know if I mentioned I'm with you here live from Mexico, but when I get home in April, I'm going to have to get a whole house system. Yeah, these are the 10 memes that Michael's flashing up here that are scrolling across the top of our safewatercalgary.com website. And they really tell a lot of the pictures. How are you going to control my fluoride dose, this other guy says? Well, you can't. It's in the water. 95% of the world, we didn't touch on that. 95% of the world does not fluoridate. And the CDC has said, it says water fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health miracles of the 20th century. Well, ending it's going to be the top one of the 21st century. This little guy, I love his look. You're going to put what in my water?
Well, yeah,
This is
and
what's costing us in fluoridate.
I was just gonna say, putting things in your water or whatever that may be, I always like to look at nature and natural source. We're not putting stuff in our water. We're eating, you know, most people, if you go back to nature, you weren't eating meat every day or things of that nature. You're lucky if you caught something. But there's
Mhm.
something to be said about natural food selection, whether it be your water, your food supply, so you're not getting all these chemicals and pesticides and genetically modified, you know, grains and foods and things. And it just strikes me, what was the statistic you mentioned about how many percent of the world is not fluoridated?
95%, and that goes up to 97% in Europe. 97% of Europe is not fluoridated, and that's been for decades. They've just been way smarter about this than we have. They have not succumbed to the pressures that the pro-fluoridationists have used. They went, you're going to put stuff in our water and try to regulate the dose? No, that doesn't work. Sorry. So yeah, like all the European, particularly Western European countries, are not fluoridated. They just went, they wanted nothing to do with that. So yeah, 97%. That's huge.
Well, and
And
that's where common sense comes to me saying if 97% of the world isn't doing it, there must be a reason. If it's as good as they say it is in the propaganda and all the information that they're putting out to support it, then why isn't everybody doing it? And
exactly.
to me, that's the common sense approach
Yeah,
is to look at those things, though, if you don't know and you're not getting information from other, media outlets or doctors or, people who know about specific subjects or topics whenever it comes down to whatever that is. How do you know? You're only getting one narrative. And I think it's important for us as, human beings to be curious about these things, especially when the
exactly.
debates become so profoundly almost polarizing in some areas, right?
Yeah, absolutely polarized. And there's just so many things that we could unpack here. Like for instance, 99%, approximately 99% of drinking water is not used to drink. It's used to flush toilets, water lawns, wash cars, used by industry, and then just flush back into our ecosystems unchecked. And so even if you're just an environmentalist, if you don't know much about fluoride in the human body, you got to say, well, these guys aren't allowed to put it in the air or the water or the ground. And all of a sudden, they're putting it in our city water and then it goes back into the environment unchecked. Well, that's a great end around by industry, I would have to say. So
Yeah,
instead of
you read
putting
my mind
million
on
a
that.
year,
Yeah, you read my mind on, I was had that question. I go, well, that doesn't make sense. They're still disposing it, but they can't do it all these other ways when it's being produced, yet they can do it, on the side. And it
yeah,
just it makes no sense. And this is why I think it's important for people to get the information, do their own research so that you can get the facts so you believe it that sense. It's not always take everybody's word for it. However, I believe exactly what you're saying because I've been a proponent of, the non-fluoride and clean water, clean food for quite some time.
well,
So,
Mark, a question for you here.
yeah,
So it's a proven neurotoxin. You've known that for years and years. Do
yeah.
you know how its toxicity compares to lead and arsenic?
Uh, I've heard it and in watching one of your videos, it came back to my memory because, like I say, I'll read something, I'll hear something, and if it makes sense, I absorb it. I don't necessarily memorize it or make it so
Mhm.
it's there, but I do know it has. There are comparative studies to that. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a proven neurotoxin in so many studies now, and about 67 of the 72 studies that the National Toxicology Program reported on, that report was blockaded and barricaded and censored by the pro-fluoridationists in the States for 4 years, but it finally came out in August of 2024. And in the NTP study, I think it was 67 of 72 studies proved and showed neurotoxicity, but 18 of the top 19 studies and that NTP report proved and showed neurotoxicity. So it's definitely a neurotoxin. And now the studies are coming out showing that it's equivalent level to arsenic and even more toxic than lead. So that's what we're putting in our public water, folks. You would never allow it. It took us 100 years to get the lead out. That's where that saying comes from, get the lead out. Well, it
Yeah.
took us 100 years to get the lead out. So we'd never put lead back in our water. We'd never allow that. But here we have fluoride, which is more toxic than lead, and we're just, yeah, let's put it in our public water. And let's not, this is important too, let's not control the dose. So, Mark, if you're drinking 10 glasses of water a day and I'm sitting here in my office drinking 1 glass, you're getting 10 times the dose that I am. 10
Mm.
times the dose. Who's controlling that? Nobody. Who's monitoring that? Nobody. Who's following up on that with you? Nobody.
That's an incredible way to think about it, especially when you start considering how much, the person who drinks 1 glass versus 10 glasses,
And
you
there's
know.
lots of that out there because if you're a laborer out in the hot sun, if you're an athlete, if you just like water, you'll drink 2 or 3 liters a day. But some people just, I don't like water that much. I'll have a cup of tea and maybe a glass of water a day. So a huge variation in dose that we're not controlling, that we can't control. You cannot control that in public water. And again, that's what led to the Europeans especially saying, nope, we're not putting any medicine in water. We're not putting Prozac. We're not putting aspirin. We're not putting Tylenol. We're not putting anything in water because you can't control the dose.
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting because I have another question, but what you just said there got me thinking about something that I saw about the people who study our water, and it was in the UK and in Britain, and what they didn't um, count on, what they discovered was what comes out and what's in the water and what then gets back into the environment. And they were talking actually about, recreational drugs. And the reason why, what brought it up was when you talked about Prozac. And then what they found that was getting released back into through sewage even, um,
Yeah.
back in there, and they were talking about cocaine, heroin, ecstasy, and how after the weekends in these big cities, there was a spike in the wastage and the sewage and all sorts of different chemicals. So it it made me think about it because where is it back to, disposing of it through industry and then watering your lawn, all those other things, what's really happening and how that then affects the environment. So
Gets back into the environment and it gets back, some of it gets back into our systems. But the interesting thing there about the environment is that a lot of the plants and fishes in our aquatic systems had developed fluoride exporting proteins. So they're kind of a little bit ahead of us. They've developed ways that they know this fluoride stuff is not good, even if it's in calcium fluoride. And so they developed proteins to export it out of their systems. We haven't done that yet. Like I said before, we sequester about 50% in our bones and pee out 50% in the urine through the kidneys. But the plants and fishes and all the other aquatic critters have developed fluoride exporting proteins, which I find quite
which
interesting.
is interesting because it relates, into a parallel of just the mercury poisoning that's in fish and people getting, eating too much fish and literally getting mercury poisoning, and then how that just affects, the ecosystem and the balance of life is really
And the
quite
human
incredible.
brain as well.
Yeah, when
And,
you start thinking
and
about it, right? So I know you had mentioned you've got 10 points in regards to fluoride in the water and things of that nature. So did you maybe want to run us through those if we haven't already covered them, of what we need to consider and how we can support that movement if that's something we
yeah,
so wish to do and what we believe?
yeah, let's do that. We've covered a good portion of them, Mark. You've done a good job there in fleshing some of these out. Um,
Nice pun, fleshing it out.
yeah, so to speak. Um, so we know it's a neurotoxin, as toxic as lead and arsenic, basically. It's most harmful to children and babies, and even unborn babies. And also, not just to children and babies, but to the disadvantaged, the poor, and people of color. That's a big one. So it harms people of color more than it harms us Caucasians. And those are the people often that are, especially in the States, in the poor segments of society, and they're the ones that are going to be harmed more by this thing, and they're the ones that they're supposedly helping. So that certainly doesn't happen. We talked about it not being needed for a single body function, that about 95 to 99% is flushed down the drain. It doesn't make good economic sense. Like, I don't know about your city, but Calgary, we're really put to the wall there with increasing taxes and tax rates, and we're always looking for money somewhere and trying to squeeze the taxpayer more. So why would we spend $28 million of taxpayers' money to build this infrastructure for this toxic hydrofluorosilicic acid that if it spills on your counter there, it's going to eat through your table, it's going to eat through all your sound equipment there, and they're going to have to bring in people in hazmat suits to clean it up. It's so volatile and toxic and dangerous.
That's
One
impressive.
thing we didn't touch on is fluorosis. And so the first visible sign of too much fluoride, of fluoride toxicity, is spots on the teeth. White spots usually in mild fluorosis, darker brown spots in moderate to severe fluorosis. And now, according to the CDC's own studies and literature, over 70% of teens have fluorosis. Over 70%, 70. That's in the United States, teens between 11 and 15 years old. And so about 80% of those are mild fluorosis, and that's all the dentists and the pro-fluoridationists will ever talk about. Oh, it's just mild fluorosis, and that's cosmetic, it's not that big a deal. But it's the first sign that your body's being toxified. And also, even if they're just mild spots, white spots in the front of your teeth, try telling a 15-year-old kid to smile if they've got spots on their teeth. They won't. No, no, they won't smile, they won't talk. And then if you get into the 20% that are moderate to severe fluorosis, oh boy, any tiny savings that might be coming forth from water fluoridation by saving a quarter of a cavity a lifetime, that is hugely dismantled by the damage that's done with moderate to severe fluorosis. There's a dentist friend in Calgary who treated two kids that grew up during our 20 years of fluoridation in Calgary from 1991 to 2011. And these two kids, fortunately, they grew up in a wealthy oil patch family. And this dentist repaired these two kids. There was severe fluorosis to the tune of $70,000 each, just to repair damage just done by water fluoridation. So, boy, that counts for a lot of cavities out there that might be
Well,
saved.
it really does, and it just goes to show you what, people aren't learning from the mainstream information, or I like to think of it as more as propaganda, because they're making, like you say in Calgary, what, $28 million a year on a waste chemical they can't get rid of. Not a bad business for somebody who wants to do that. So that saying, follow the money, right?
Yeah, it's actually $1 million a year for the product and for the hazmat suits. It was $28 million to rebuild the infrastructure that was gone in
Gotcha.
2011 when we stopped it. Um,
And
but
so
it
is
hit
what's
us
the
so hard on
percentage?
infrastructure.
Yeah, what's the percentage of US that fluoridates their water?
It's a little bit variable, but let's say 70%. Some people say as high as 73 or 74%. Some people say as low as 62 or 64. But if you say about 70% are fluoridated, but that goes back to who drinks tap water. Well, there's not real good studies on this one, but I would hazard a kind of a learned guess that less than 50% of people drink tap water.
Okay.
So if 60, let's say 2/3 are fluoridated and half of those people don't drink the tap water, that means a third of people are getting fluoride. So those third are really getting dangerous things, harmful things happening to them. But this fluoridation program is not being effective. If 99% goes down the drain and only a third of people are drinking the tap water, I mean, that's just a totally ineffective program, even if it did work.
Yeah, and it gets me thinking because okay, fluoride in the water. What else is in the water? We know there's a lot of places that put chlorine in the water, and the tap water smells really bad, tastes really bad. That's why I've always had an aversion to tap water. But what about everything else in the water, not just the fluoride?
Yeah, so all kinds of things toxifying this. Like you'd mentioned before, Mark, about the plastics in our water. Now it's been shown and proven that about 0.5% of our brains in weight are plastics, microplastics. My
Yeah,
gosh, that's
yeah.
not doing us any good at all. And then the fertilizers, as we mentioned before, and the herbicides and the pesticides and hormones and all that. I mean, yeah, get a good filter, folks, and filter your water. even if you're not fluoridated, but getting an even better filter if you are fluoridated. So just a couple of quick points to make there. We might be running out of time. If people want to go to a really good site that's out of Ontario by a young engineer by the name of Casey Kroll, K-R-O-L-L, Casey Kroll, and his site is called just do truth about fluoride, truthaboutfluoride.com. It's his website. There's no thes in there. There's no spaces. It's just truthaboutfluoride.com. And young Casey has saved me a lot of time and work because he's gone through all kinds of dozens and dozens of fridge filters, the countertop filters, the under the sink reverse osmosis filters, and the whole house filters. He's also gone through teas, like dozens and dozens of teas, because teas hyperconcentrate fluoride. So he's gone through the good, the bad, the ugly of teas. So a lot of grannies will drink way too much tea, and then they get a whole lot of fluoride, and then they get skeletal fluorosis because they have too much fluoride in the system. So he's gone through all those things there. So go to truthaboutfluoride.com and buy Casey a coffee, as he likes to ask for. He says it's a free site, but he says, if you really like this information, buy me a coffee. Well, I'll tell you, I bought him a lot of coffees.
Well, that's great. And I think it's important that people know where to find the right information for these sorts of things. So this, kind of a woo-woo question. We are Conscious Living Radio. We cover a lot of different topics in regard to spirituality and things of that nature. So what is the truth, as you know or understand, in regards to, because the big one that always triggered me was that it really affects our pineal gland, which is our third eye, and what gives us our clairvoyance, our vision, our intuition, or enhances our spirituality. Is that a true statement, do you believe?
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely calcifies the pineal gland, which is also called the seat of the soul, which does a lot of the sort of executive and spiritual functions in our lives. So yes, it calcifies the pineal gland. There are ways to uncalcify, decalcify the pineal gland, but the best way is just to not drink fluoride, not to use fluoride products of any kind. And to me, that would be even in your toothpaste. There's much better. That's another thing that Casey Kroll on Truth About Fluoride goes into his toothpaste. And the best toothpaste to use have hydroxyapatite in. They remineralize the tooth. So fluoride replaces hydroxyapatite in the tooth with fluoroapatite, which is slightly stronger, but then it affects every cell and every organ, every system in the body. So use a good toothpaste with hydroxyapatite, not with fluoride. You'll pay a little bit more, but by gosh, your teeth will thank you for it. And your dentist won't thank you because your dental bills will be a lot less, but your banker will thank.
Well, yeah, I avoid the fluoride toothpaste, and I have for years, ever since I learned what I believe to be true that way. So it's something that, I feel has it made a difference? Well, I don't know. I can tell you, I certainly feel way better when I started changing my life around. And it's not just the water, but it's the food, it's the mindset, it's clean living, good breathing, and water. I always like to say, the most important thing in life is our breath, because it's the one thing we can't live with for the shortest amount of time. And then it's water. We need to have good water. We're 98% water as human beings. Then we should be drinking good, clean water for good, clean health, right?
Exactamente, boy. You've hit the nail on the head there. And that's what the MAHA organization in the States. We should probably touch on the States. How many minutes do we have left here, Mark?
We have about 8 minutes.
Oh, perfect. So let's touch on MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now that he's been confirmed as head of HHS.
Well, I'm excited. I don't know. Everybody has a different opinion. I'm excited to see what he's going to do in regards to exposing some information and, truth, or at the very least, transparency.
One of the first things he's going to do is send out to all the water organizations, all the states that still mandate fluoridation, all the cities and jurisdictions that require fluoridation and still fluoridate. He's going to send all the science out there, and he can't stop them from fluoridating. He does not have that power, but what he's going to do is recommend strongly that they all stop water fluoridation, because he's going to send them the science of why they should do that. And if you listen to Dr. Joe Ladapo, the Surgeon General of Florida, on November 22nd, he did a great podcast in front of a water fluoridation facility. And he said right in that podcast, and this is a direct quote, that anybody that still fluoridates after we send them the science is committing medical malpractice. Those are strong, strong words. So, and that's what Kennedy's going to say something similar to that with MAHA. And so once all that information gets out there, part of the science that he's sending out is part of our science through the Fluoride Action Network. That's another great site to go on, is the Fluoride Action Network out of the States. They have all the information on the court case that they led for 7 years with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And we won that on September 24th of this last year, September 24th of 2024, we won that 7-year court case against the Environmental Protection Agency, and saying that fluoride is poses an unreasonable risk to the brains of our kids. That's all it was about. It was not about the thyroids. It's not about the pineal gland. It's not about the heart. It's not about the kidneys, not about the bones. It was totally about, does it pose an unreasonable risk to the brains of kids? And yes, that court decision that came out on September 24th showed that. So that science is all on the Fluoride Action Network website, which is Fluoride Alert. It's fluoridealert, all one word, .org. Excellent website. And you can look at the 80-page judgment. We have that on our website too, the 80-page judgment from Judge Chen in the federal court in the United States from September. But all that information and the videos are all on the Fluoride Action Network as well. We call that FAN for short. So that's fluoridealert.org.
Wow.
So
Well,
yeah, lots of information on there.
that's truly incredible. And I want to thank you and really respect the work that you're doing and putting this out there to educate not just Canadians, Americans, and people around the globe, because I certainly think it's important. And if we look at fluoride as fluoride, and not just in your water, from toothpaste and dentistry and all of those things, I think it's really important. And, the intention with us here at Conscious Living is that people have the information and that they can make their own decisions to what makes sense for them based on doing their own research. I personally happen to agree with what you're saying. And, from what I've seen, glancing over science and things of that nature, it's what makes sense.
And thanks to people like you for putting it out there, Mark, because the mainstream media is not allowed, from the highest pay grades, they're not allowed to talk anti-fluoride. So people like you, Laura Lynn, I've been on her TV show, I've been on Rebel News and many others across Canada. And you guys are allowed to do that because you're not funded by the government. Yeah, you're not funded by big pharma. And if you're funded by those agencies or organizations or governments, then you cannot talk about it. You're not allowed to talk about anything anti-fluoride, or probably anything else that's happened in the last 5 years that I won't mention.
Well, and it's interesting, and without mentioning anything specific, what you're saying in regards to the media, I strongly urge people, if you're watching or listening, then thank you for that. And, like, subscribe to our channels, whatever that may be. Though it's important to get other input and understand that, like you say, these government funded medias and big pharma funded media companies and things of that nature, that there is somewhat of an agenda, and it's about following the money, because there is profit to be had there. I'm not saying that they don't report anything good, or that there's not truth to things that they say on certain subjects, though it's important to ask yourself why these things get silenced and quieted, and what that is. And it's that ability for free thinking and to ask the questions and to make your own decisions without just believing every narrative that you're hearing. Even here on our show from me or Dr. Bob, but do your research and make an informed decision with the information.
And they're not allowed to rock the boat. So yes, people, please fund people like Conscious Living and any of the alternative press out there, people on Substack that are writing really good things. Join them, fund them, be part of the movement to get the information and the science and the data out there. Because our colleges, and we could maybe end it on this, my College of Physicians and Surgeons in Alberta pursued me for 6 years, and we just ended the court case 3 weeks ago. For 6 years, I was dragged through the tribunal with the College of Physicians and Surgeons, and in an attempt to silence me, perhaps take my license away, but at least to keep me quiet. It didn't work, but I did plead guilty to one charge out of the four that they charged me against. So I got absolved from the charges of not having the adequate medical training to state obvious fluoride facts and figures in science, and free speech. We won on that part too. And but what I did plead guilty to was professional misconduct. And that's because I called the people that were not telling the truth, I called them liars. I probably could have been more tactful, but I called them liars in public. But I had the proof, the documentation to show where they're lying. But I'm not allowed to do that because of the code of ethics of the College of Physicians and Surgeons. So many doctors won't say anything. They won't stand up. They won't speak out, even if they don't believe everything about the vaxes. They don't believe everything about fluoridation. They're afraid to stand up because they see the large fines that I had to pay, the 2-day psychological re-entrenchment course like Jordan Peterson has to take.
Yeah.
I have to take a similar course on my own dollar or my own $2,000. And yeah, and then my name is sort of banished around the press, or branded around the press, and very bad things have been said about me in the Calgary Herald, etc., that are not true. And so, yeah, my reputation has taken a big hit, my bank account, and yeah, personal pride as well.
Well, I thank you for sticking with it in terms of, staying with the mission. And freedom of speech is one of our most fundamental human rights, I believe. And we see and hear from it in the news and different things, and where it's affected in the world. The only thing I like to say about free speech is, yeah, have free speech, but let's at least be nice to each other. At the end of the day, say your piece without being overly, mean about it is my belief. And that's just what that is. Though, Dr. Bob, I want to thank you again for the great work you're doing for, the health of the people all around the world, here in Canada. And if you want to learn more, visit fluoridefreecanada.ca, as well as Dr. Bob's from Calgary. He does a lot of work there, safewatercalgary.com. And here in Vancouver, we're lucky. We don't have to be concerned about fluoride in our water. But if you want to learn more about fluoride, do your research. I think it's a really important thing to know, because it's part of most people's everyday lives and they're not even consciously aware about it. So again, Dr. Bob, thank you.
You're quite welcome. People in BC, be aware, they're going to try to fluoridate you. So be conscious, be aware, be awake, be ready for it, and be ready.
Vancouver's got a pretty good demographic in terms of the people and their health consciousness and things. So I'd like to think that that's not going to happen. I don't drink tap water, so I'm okay with that right now. So
but don't let them sneak it in. So thanks for having me on the show, Mark, and thanks for all that you do out there. And yeah, we need a more conscious society, a more conscious world, and we can do that through love and respect and grace and humility. And if we do all those things and treat ourselves and each other like that, we're going to have a much better world. And let's get these toxins and poisons out of our food systems and out of our water.
Completely agree. And a big shout out and thank you to Michael Krause on the back end, my partner in production, who introduced me to Dr. Bob and his work, and for supporting Conscious Living so we can do our podcast and broadcast in a different way, as well as our radio show. So once again, my name is Marc Caron. You've been listening to Conscious Living, where we air every Wednesday in Vancouver on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio. Thank you very much, everyone. And until next time, take care of each other.
Adios. Hasta luego.